They simply cannot keep getting away with this. The Pacers do it again. Specifically, that man, the playoff hero, Mr. Clutch, Tyrese Haliburton, stunning the heavy favorites, the Oklahoma City Thunder, in Game 1 of the NBA Finals, at their place nonetheless. And while a lot of people are going to be talking about how stunning this is and what this potentially means for the outlook of this series, we're going to have to start talking about the statistical improbability of what Indiana are pulling off as well. There is simply no way other than the stats describe what the Indiana Pacers are doing in the playoffs right now, specifically in matchups in which they are the heavy underdogs. Think about this. They have now won 5 playoff series as the lower seed in the past 2 postseasons. That's incredible to behold. That's not the only stat that matters right now in the specific chaotic playoff run for Indiana. Consider this. Teams before this playoffs run for Indiana were 1 in 1,640 in moments where they were down 7 in a playoff game in the final minute. You can add 3 wins to that 1. In the past decade or so, 2 decades or so, since those stats were tracked, the Pacers have 3 wins in the span of about 1.5 months. Now consider this. If we just look at the finals alone, because this instance of a comeback was not necessarily too similar, despite the fact it was even more improbable than their previous 3. They were within a couple of points in the final minutes of this game. However, they were behind by 9 with about 5 or so minutes to go. And in those moments, teams were 0 and 182 in NBA Finals games alone. In those moments, you can add 1 win to that column as well. And now let's talk about the player, the man of the moment for the Pacers when it comes to stats, Tyrese Haliburton. Because this is just his second postseason. And he now has as many shots to tie the game or win the game in the final 2 seconds in the postseason than anyone outside of LeBron James in 2 singular postseasons, but specifically just this one. He's had 3, now 4, to add to his impressive resume as someone who was voted just this past year one of the most, if not the most, overrated player in the NBA by his peers. And he's doing it now on the biggest stage he possibly can against the toughest opponent the Pacers have faced in their playoff run thus far. But here's the most impressive stat, right before we get into the stats that define this game. 4 teams have done the exact same thing in Game 1 or multiple games of the NBA Finals, what have you, in the past 2 decades or so. Overcome, that is, a 15-point deficit in the last 10 minutes or so of an NBA Finals game. All 4 of those teams were coached by Rick Carlisle. He's done it now with Indiana. He did it with Dallas. And as an assistant coach, I'm pretty sure he did it with Chicago. That just goes to show that all these parts make up a whole for Indiana. And it's why they are where they are right now. Because no one would have expected this kind of statistical improbability to occur for the Pacers so many different times. It was an anomaly against Milwaukee in their closeout Game 5 when they were down 7 in overtime and came back on a game-winning shot from Haliburton again. It was improbable when they were down 7 in Game 2 of the semifinals when Tyrese Haliburton gave them a 2-0 lead on a game-winning three-pointer. It was improbable when he tied the game in the final moments of their first game of the Eastern Conference Finals against New York, when they went on to win in overtime. And it's even more improbable now against a team that many expected could, at the very least, win this game and win the series, most importantly, in 5, the Oklahoma City Thunder. Which perfectly kind of segues into the stats of the game, the stats to define the game. Because many who may not have seen this game, may just be casual NBA fans at that, who will probably look at these stats this morning, will probably think Oklahoma City should have won, or certainly had won. Because Indiana Pacers did something in this comeback that not many teams can overcome. In the first half alone, they turned the ball over 19 times, which is one more than the average that OKC has averaged throughout the postseason. In the first half, they were held to 45 points. They could not shoot the three. But the most important thing about that first half for Indiana is that they were only down by 12 points. And something that the Oklahoma City Thunder have done so well at the postseason, converting turnovers into points to the point where they were the leaders in the postseason in that regard, did not happen. They simply could not put the ball in the net after a turnover by the Indiana Pacers. And for the most part, funnily enough, a lot of the Pacers' turnovers, at least early on in the game, were just errant passes. So you didn't necessarily, if you're the Thunder, get too many chances to operate in transition. But you have to give credit to the moments where, when the Pacers did turn the ball over, and there was an opportunity to be had in transition, that they were able to get back defensively to the point where the Thunder could not convert those opportunities. It was the most turnovers, most importantly, by a team in a first half ever. Not since Portland Trailblazers, who ironically are a team that comes up a lot when we talk about this finals in terms of how young both of these teams are, had a team won a finals game committing at least 25 turnovers, but the Pacers did. Now you're probably thinking, well, if the Pacers had 25 turnovers, that means there were only 6 in the second half. How did that happen? And I'll tell you what happened. A brilliant combination of individual brilliance, a team ethos, and a coach who just knows these situations too well for you to believe he's just going to fold. And that's what happened. They scored 66 points in that second half. They hit 50% of their threes. Most importantly, no one player dominated the action for the Indiana Pacers. Their leading scorer was Pascal Siakam with 19 points. 5 Pacers were in double digits, but none of them went over the 20-point mark. In fact, every single Pacers player except for Benedict Mathurin scored or assisted on a Pacers basket in this game. It just goes to show that they buy in no matter where they are in the game. And most importantly, Rick Carlisle understood that despite the fact that they were playing terribly and turning the ball over, something they were unaccustomed to against this fascinating OKC defense, he knew they were still in it. He said as much at halftime, right? They had 19 turnovers, and if they were only down by 12, if they could gain some modicum of control in the second half, chances were they were going to be in this game. That's exactly what they did. And kudos has to go to Rick Carlisle for that. Because a lot of what happened in the second half was simple out coaching, where the Pacers understood the different defenses, the different lineups that the Thunder were going to throw at them after adjusting from the first half, and were able to close the gap and ultimately steal this game. But when I look at it, it also came down to trust. Because the most important part of this game came in the final two possessions, right? The Thunder had missed two of the previous shots before a chance to close this game up 1. And Shea misses that mid-range jumper, a shot you'll expect him to make 9 times out of 10. At that point, you, as Rick Carlisle, could have called a timeout. Essentially so that you could set up a play that you really liked. But no, he knew that his team would be able to get out in transition, get a good look, and not allow a defense that can close you down in those kinds of moments to get themselves set up. And still, it was a tough shot for Haliburton to make. Cason Wallace, one of the best on-ball defenders in the NBA right now, was right in his face. And he still made that shot. He still was able to get out in transition, get to his spot where he felt comfortable, and hit that game winner. That just goes to show that everything right now, no matter what chaos has occurred before, is clicking for the Pacers in those moments. And it's something that the Thunder have to think about, right? Because this is Indiana's MO. They, in game 1 at the very least, go into your place and steal a game. That has been their identity throughout this entire postseason. And maybe they could even steal 2, like they did to the Knicks, like they did to the Cavs. But the thing that will haunt OKC most about this game is that it was theirs to have. And I think it's not quite as simple as just saying that, but think about how this offense operated in this game. There were moments where you kind of felt like they were going to blow this game out of the water. And then there were moments like in the first half where they had a big lead, but it never necessarily felt safe. It never felt like the previous rounds where they were able to build a lead that was insurmountable, where teams weren't able to come back. This always felt like the Thunder were doing just enough to have these big leads, but never to the point where, despite the fact, in my case, I thought the game was over when they were up 12, that the lead was safe. And so, when the Thunder watched this game back and think about what went wrong, I definitely think that it's the minute details that occurred when the Pacers were able to find their specific matchups. And while I'm going to talk about how throughout history, throughout NBA history, teams that have gone down 1-0 at home have been able to win game 2 by a huge margin and dominate in that setting after losing like this in game 1. This is an interesting matter for the Thunder Because for the first time in any half they've played, there were moments where you can look at isolation and say, oh my god, this Thunder team has been exposed. And you can't necessarily have said that throughout their season, throughout their playoff run, despite the fact that their series against Denver won 7 games. But you never, ever, in the instance of this OKC Thunder season, have said they've truly been exposed. But the Pacers did just that, right? If you think about how they were able to get hot from 3, specifically with their big men, specifically with guys like Turner and Toppin, who you kind of have to rely upon beyond the arc to generate points for this offense if you're the Pacers in this specific series. They did it by exactly what I thought they were going to have to do to exploit matchups where I think they could have won. They extended the floor, they spaced the floor well, and forced Chet Holmgren out of the paint. And to be able to do that with 2 bigs, one in Siakam, who is more apt around the rim, and then Miles Turner, who can go beyond the arc and shoot the 3-ball well. That complicates things if you're the Thunder. Remember, right, that against Denver, against Jokic specifically, they went to a smaller lineup. And it worked for large portions of the series, with Alex Caruso as the primary defender on Nikola Jokic. But this one is different, right? Because Chet Holmgren is not someone who, in my opinion, wants to thrive on the perimeter as a defender. His MO is to stay in the paint, make sure the rim is protected and you don't get easy 2s. That's the problem as well, right? Because Chet Holmgren can be a rim protector, but Isaiah Hardenstein also fits that mold as well. A guy who thrives in his rim protection. But against Siakam and Turner, who force you to think differently because of their different ways to attack the basket, it's going to challenge guys like Holmgren and Hartenstein, your 2 big men you rely upon down low, to start thinking about how to defend the perimeter if Daigneault continues to use them in that regard. And even when the Thunder can go small and can put out guys who are pesky defenders, even better than pesky defenders, that are undersized, you would expect them to perform better than they did against the Pacers. But they didn't, because the Pacers do something as well that I think really is a bad sign for OKC, and that is shoot the 3 well. They shot 46% from 3. That's the one thing in my mind that from the OKC Thunder, I'm watching this game, that I'm a little bit scared of, a little bit wary of, because that has always been the one true chink in the armor in this excellent defensive squad. They gave up the 3. And if the Pacers continue to make them at the clip they have been making them throughout this postseason, then chances are this is not just a blown game for the Thunder. This is a bad sign for how the rest of the series could go. And here's the thing. They are the OKC Thunder. They're still the best team in the NBA. And team historically, like I said, who have gone down at home in Game 1 in playoff series have come back to win 21 times. They're 21-7 when they lose Game 1 at home. And we've already seen an instance of this team coming back in Game 2 to win in dominant fashion. against the Nuggets. Denver stole game one. They were down 13, and Aaron Gordon hit that game-winning three. OKC comes back, blows them out to the tune of 43 points. So chances are this could be an anomaly in the series. Anything is still on. Thunder in 5 is still on. Thunder in 6 is still on, in terms of how people believe the outcome of the series will go. But this now feels like something the Pacers can tangibly hang their hat on. They've done it now against Milwaukee. They've done it now against Cleveland. They've done it now against a team very familiar with comebacks in this playoffs themselves, against New York. And they've done it against the best team in the NBA. And chances are that Rick Carlisle could be right. Had the Pacers not turned the ball over 19 times in the first half, imagine what the score could have been. Imagine how close it could have been in that regard. Like I said, they were only down 12 points despite turning the ball over 19 times in the first half against a team that averages 18 forced turnovers in an entire game. So if the Pacers just take care of the basketball, who knows what the series can look like? And here's the thing, right? You would say that both of these teams are relatively inexperienced in the finals, but the Pacers have Pascal Siakam on their roster. And while the Thunder have Alex Caruso, another NBA champion, they are still a young team who, for the first time, have to navigate a situation where they have a chance to do something to cement themselves as one of the best Thunder teams this franchise has ever seen. So a lot of pressure on their shoulders, whereas the Pacers feel free. They feel like no matter what, they are invincible. And even if in Game 2 they get blown out of the water, it's still the best of 4. Now for the Thunder, it adds more gravity to their situation, but the Pacers not thinking of this as like, okay, we're 3 wins away from an NBA title, so chances are we just have to take care of business and we can stun the world here. And for the first time in their history with a lead, chances are this Pacers team don't want to fold here. Chances are they're going to give the Thunder their best shots from here on out. And so, while this could be an anomalous game in an NBA final that turns out to be a dominant OKC Thunder victory in the end, it also gives this finals a bit of humanity. These are 2 small market teams who have never won an NBA championship before, with players who have never been on this stage before. So, if you put it like that, really anything can happen. Because the Thunder, no matter how good they are, no matter how historically fantastic this defense has been, are still green to this whole NBA Finals experience. It reminds me of the Celtics in 2022 against the Warriors, when the Warriors had all the experience coming into the finals, and the Celtics just didn't handle it that well. But when they got back, which I think both of these teams are highly capable of, they were able to win. But now that both of these teams are in wholly unfamiliar territory, it just levels the playing field, despite the fact that one team could be seen as having a clear advantage over the other in every category that matters. But with the Indiana Pacers, stats, categories, teams don't matter to them. What matters to them is just staying in it and finding ways to win. They've done it throughout their entire postseason run, and now 1-0, their first ever lead in NBA Finals. They control their own destiny, which is something that, if you're a Pacers fan, you might be starting to feel real good about. But as for the Thunder, this is a team that understands now the gravity of the situation. like a punch in the mouth, but don't expect them to cower in Game 2. Expect them to come out boldly and courageously, to the very least, into a 1-1 series. But if it goes to 2-0, Pacers fans can maybe start dreaming of an improbable playoff run ending in improbable fashion. But just about do it for today's edition of Sporting View. Thank you all for tuning in. Let's hope we get more games like this in these NBA Finals. Let's hope we get more games like we saw in Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Finals. Because whenever these two sports go down to the wire, there's a lot of excitement surrounding them. So let's hope that both these games are the norm for both these respective finals. But coming up, we have a lot of off-season stuff to talk about, a lot of unusual things happening in the NFL, a lot of things that could be happening in the NBA when it's all said and done. But stay tuned, as always, for the most up-to-date sports news, and I will see you very soon.